Everybody, it's Eugene Lisho here, and welcome to Forensics Talks. This is our 26th episode, which I'm really happy about. We're still pushing forward here. A couple of quick announcements before we begin for today, and one of them is that we are having our photogrammetry week coming up on April 6th to 8th, and that is going to be a series of webinars. They're open, they're free, whatever. All you got to do is register, and then we'll send you all the links and everything else. If you're interested in photogrammetry and how you can use your digital camera to capture, 3D models or create 3D models from your digital photographs, then come on in. There's some good information there. The other thing that I wanted to announce here was that, and I've talked about this last week, that the Canadian Society of Forensic Science is having a conference the week of June 21st. And so there's still a whole bunch of details to come, but I'm trying to give people as much of a heads up as possible. Already got some really good speakers booked, some very well-respected international speakers. And so going to be looking forward to that. And as soon as we get more details, I'll make sure to post and let people know. Alrighty. Well, what I'm going to do here is get started with our guest. And our next guest I actually met in Nashville, and I guess it's getting on to like 3 or 4 years ago. And his presentation actually struck me, and I was really impressed with the type of work that he was doing. And so this is Paul Coley, and Paul is a former FBI canine operations specialist, and he's dedicated his entire career to public service in the fields of education, law enforcement, criminal justice, forensics, and emergency management. And in 2012, Paul founded Scent Evidence Canine, and this was a way for him to help communities and law enforcement agencies improve their methods of locating missing persons, and just by developing some innovative ways, with the dogs and training and a number of things. He also developed a life-saving scent preservation kit, so the Seeker, and the scent evidence collection vacuum to provide canine responders with uncontaminated scent articles that increases the location success and reduces recovery time. Paul and his team, they also provide training, so scent detection canines, handler training, and missing person response protocol training for various agencies across North America and even internationally. Paul is also pioneering some integration of drone technology to the canine trailing process. So I definitely want to ask him about that because I think it's kind of informative. So let's bring him in here. Hey, Paul, you there? Hey, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me today.
All right, awesome. So yeah, a lot's happened, I think, since I saw you in the Nashville conference there. And I'm trying to remember the name of it. I think it was the International Homicide. Was it the Homicide Investigators Association? Or it was one of those.
International Crime Scene Investigators.
Crime Scene Investigators. I think that's the one. Yeah, okay, great. Thanks for helping me out there. But I was really impressed. I mean it. You could tell you're very passionate about what you do. You're very passionate about the dogs, and really put a lot of effort into the training part of everything. So can you tell me a bit regarding, your past before you got into this? And, were you always a dog lover from a young age, or did you always have dogs? Or I guess people ask you that sometimes.
Yeah, I started training dogs when I was probably 17, 18 years old. I'm in the southeast of the United States, and we love to hunt down here. And I trained retrievers and pointing dogs, and didn't know later on in life that would come back to be my vocation.
Mm-hmm.
Worked in law enforcement and corrections for about 10 years, and actually ended up being the head of security at the largest mental health facility in the state of Florida.
Okay.
We had about 2,000 residents there, and we had issues with individuals going missing, escaping, or eloping.
Mm-hmm.
So we were challenged with finding a good system for locating those people as quickly as possible. And that's where the canines came in. And we took a different approach to it. We looked for scent discriminant trailing dogs at that point in time. Didn't have a lot of knowledge about that, just what we'd seen on TV. And so we started looking at that tool, and we applied quality management techniques to the application of the canines.
Mm-hmm.
So doing some research and developing our system there and actually measuring our success rates there. We went from it taking us 24 hours to locate an individual that had left the facility to an hour and 15 minutes using these resources.
Interesting.
And at that point, I ended up doing a seminar with the FBI, Rex Stockham, who ended up being my SSA, and some other experts in the field. I ended up getting to work with them for a short time. And after that, I wanted to come back and really just dig into developing new systems for finding missing persons.
So did you always have the idea, like, so, you're just like, hey, when I retire or when I make my career change, because you started this in like 2012. So you've been, you're getting on to 10 years almost. So was it something like, yeah, I got to do this kind of thing, or?
It was just one of those things that just wouldn't leave me. In Florida, we've had some really big cases, and then there's some international cases that we had some connection with. And in 2018, I actually did a presentation to the Florida legislature with Elizabeth Smart. And we really looked into her case and the techniques that were used there. We just wanted to bring some innovation to that operational activity.
I see. Well, what can you tell me about, for example, how things were done a long time, 20 years ago or 30 years ago versus, for example, some of the things that you're doing today? Like, what was the standard back then, let's say?
Well, they would utilize tracking dogs compared to trailing dogs. And there is a difference. Tracking, you're mainly focusing on ground disturbance, or there is some human odor in there, but that's the majority of the application of a police dog at a scene like that.
Mm-hmm.
Where trailing dogs are designed and trained to take a targeted odor and follow that targeted odor trail to the individual. So that really made a lot of sense to me, and my work, in Quantico really helped develop my view of that. And so when I started my own company, I was like, wow, we could really get individuals to pre-collect their scent and store that in an evidence grade jar in a forensic application system. We're going to see it improve, because we actually did a root cause analysis. My wife is a Six Sigma black belt. So we were a little bit frustrated with the success or lack of success with some of our trailing activities. Mm-hmm. So we started looking at the process and broke it down in a process-driven approach. The scent article is extremely important. That's the key that turns the dog on. At a scene, what you get is multiple odors on a scent article. We've all seen it on TV where you grab a pillowcase and present that to your dog. Well, that pillowcase could have, if it's a child, it could have mom, it could have dads, could have other brothers and sisters, anybody that came into the scene to do a cursory search, whatever. Well, then those people go out and look before they actually a lot of times call and have these resources brought to them. So making the process much more effective and efficient is what we were all about. Evidence grade jar, pre-collection, a direct swipe on the body. We've actually had it tested through a DNA lab and got it narrowed down to underneath the arm, 10 swipes. You get a lot of odor there that has lasted. We're getting ready to do an 8-year test with our product here in the next few weeks. But research has showed, captured this way in glass, stored, dogs have been able to do scent matches up to 10 years after.
Okay. Like scent as a form of evidence. I mean, we see it always in the TV shows and stuff. They break out the hounds and they're going through the woods and they're going like mad trying to find an individual. So, I mean, it's known as a form of evidence, but are many people, it would seem to me, not a lot of people really consider it seriously, maybe, or maybe, you get to a scene and they don't think about, well, how, maybe there's a way I could, like if somebody leaves a shirt behind or something, you know what I mean? Is there a way to, capture and save pieces of evidence like that so in the future they can, use it again? There
is. We actually teach methods where we actually use the same kit to pre-collect scent, and we've actually got our scent vacuum that's been used. I think the latest data we have is 75, 76 times. Those numbers are changing daily with a success rate in the mid 90s. So there is. The problem with it is if they don't collect it early on, just like, with your photographs we were talking about earlier, if you don't capture that evidence at the very beginning, then it's lost. So we're working with agencies to pre-collect that or collect it on scene, store it, label it just like you do other pieces of evidence, then you've got that evidence to utilize throughout the investigation as well.
Okay. Yeah. So what I brought it up on screen here, but could you describe the unit for us and kind of like how it's supposed to work?
Yeah, you see the tan part there is the grate. There's a 5x9 sterile gauze pad that goes in there.
Okay.
You vacuum it. Well, you find your location. You vacuum it for 1 minute, and then the back grid comes out, and there's a push rod that actually pushes the collected scent down in that evidence grade jar. You can take multiple samples, store it. We've got a chain of custody that goes with it so that you have that scent collected for canine teams if you need it to work the case.
So there's two, like, so for some people, they, like for somebody, let's say, for example, somebody who is at risk of going missing, maybe an elderly person or something like that, you could do this right from the beginning. You capture their scent and you save it someplace. You put it in one of your jars, and they're vacuum sealed, they're protected and everything. And then when you need it, you break it out. But then the other scenario you're saying is, you have a piece of evidence, and then you could use it that way. You could also, like, what if the scent is left on a shirt or something like that? How do you?
Well, one of the cool things about this vacuum is you can actually vacuum it without disturbing other pieces of evidence. So if there's DNA or fingerprints or hair fibers and stuff, the vacuum will not interfere with those pieces of evidence as well. So you're collecting it. And if you took that shirt and handed it to a dog for it to, collect scent from that, then you just handled a piece of evidence. You're introducing potentials, other varying pieces, dog hair, slobber, all those different things that could create an issue later on in the investigation.
Oh, interesting. Let me ask you about the dogs in particular. I'm curious about the types of dogs. And I mean, dogs in general, I mean, they're obviously much better at detecting scent than we are, but is part of it, like, for example, within a certain breed of dog, do you find that just some are just going to be way better than others? And even, between breeds, maybe there's 2 or 3 or 4 breeds that are just exceptional?
We tend to use bloodhounds for what we do. Bloodhounds were bred in 646 AD at a monastery in what is now modern day Belgium. They were originally called St. Hubert hounds. They were one of the first breeds bred for a specific task. And that line and lineage is maintained to this day. So they have been bred to do trailing for hundreds of years. There's actually, I have to go back and look it up, but in the 17th century, a chemist documented a several-day-old trail that had a lot of contamination, and they found the individual in the second story of a house. So they've been doing this work for a very long time. There's federal court cases that actually gone through Daubert hearings related to the work and the training and the application of bloodhounds in the U.S.
Is it fairly well understood in terms of the chemistry or the sort of the dynamics of what is happening, the part of the scent? So I've heard there's blood, you can use blood as a scent. I've heard you can use saliva as a scent. And then of course there's sweat or the oils on your body. So like, is it known what in particular is triggering the dogs?
There's been quite a few research projects done along with this. And I think there's 3 components to human scent: your environment, your genetics, and the other parts of things that you're dealing with in your community, food you eat, things along those lines. So that kind of makes up, for lack of a better way to put it, your scent print. So that dog is able to say, this is Eugene, this is who I'm looking for. We've actually tested it multiple times with identical twins. I live here in Tallahassee, and we have the ROTC programs here, and some of these guys and ladies are going to be going into special operations, so they want to practice their evading. So they collect scent, and we go out and it gives us an opportunity to work our dogs. Well, this one morning, I get there and they had a scent kit set up for me, and away, that's my starting point. Well, we trailed probably 3/4 of a mile, and the dog takes us in there, finds their individual and sits and alerts. And there was actually 2 other individuals within 100 yards of there. And they came out after we located them, and I got to looking. That's, wait a minute. It was identical brothers, identical twins. They lived in the same place. They pretty much ate everything the same. So very difficult, trail for that dog to run. And that was about a 9-month-old trained bloodhound that did that. So.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. In terms of, I was going to ask you something about the training and what's involved with getting the dogs up to speed, kind of thing. What kind of exercises do you run the dogs through?
We start our puppies at 8 and 9 weeks old. We start the scent discriminate training with them to begin with. We have a written training plan that has goals and objectives, and we want our dogs at 90% on each goal and objective before we move them to the next level. That was one of the things that we wanted to develop, was a very rigorous training plan. And we try to train 4 to 5 days a week, multiple times, to get this operant conditioning of this training in there. And it's all, a trail's a lot of straight turns, straight lines with turns. So we want to get these dogs doing this really well.
Wow.
We teach the scent discrimination first because that's probably the more difficult part for them. The trailing comes natural to them. The ones that are, not every dog is meant to do this kind of work. You find a few that would much rather lay on the porch and just be a companion. But the majority of our dogs that want to do this work, they really enjoy it. One of the other things that we do is at the very end of the trail, when they locate their individual, because we look for so many vulnerable people, our dogs are trained to just simply sit to ID their individual, so that individuals that are dealing with dementia, children on the spectrum, sensory overload can create a lot of issues for you.
Right.
So when I first started this, we were all teaching the jump alert. The dog would jump up on the individual to say, that's who I'm looking for.
Yeah.
But as we work with people we serve, that may not be the best approach for us. So I got a chance to work with some fantastic trainers in the UK, Alan Williams and Mark Brown, and they were using the sit alert there, and we came back and adjusted all our dogs to the sit alert for many reasons.
So how many dogs can you train at the same time, and what's the duration of the training?
The training usually lasts about 8 to 10 months before we can get them operational, and then it continues. The life of that dog, you're continuously training, retraining, looking at issues, developing, training scenarios for the dog. We tell our handlers that we work with, your best training scenario is your last failure. So you go back and try to recreate it to understand what variable you missed in it, because there's so many variables in dealing with this. You've got environmental, you've got the age of the trail, just so many different things that these handlers have to deal with while they're actually working these cases. So
it's one handler, one dog, and that's it. That's what they're working with, that dog, and it's a partnership, right?
It is. It really is. And we train our dogs to work with multiple handlers, but usually when they get to their agency, it's usually a one handler, one dog, and they develop a very strong partnership. Bloodhounds love to bond, and once they develop that bond with that handler, they will do just about anything for them. I've seen them go miles and miles trying to find their target.
Yeah. Well, and I'm talking about training of the dogs, but there's training of the handler, right?
That's the more difficult part.
Right.
We have just started. I've been doing this, 15, 20 years now, and we always talked about reading your dog. And it's I never quite understood that. So we were looking and trying to find new methods to make these handlers better and develop the system for training them better. So we've come up with some terminology, and it's called experiential learning of canine communication. What we feel and what we see, instead of reading the dog, that dog's communicating things to us the entire trail, and we're communicating to them as well. So it's almost like teaching a new language to the handlers so that they understand what the dog's saying and the dog understands what the handler's saying. And we're starting to see some phenomenal success. We have just trained 12 teams here in Florida, and we're collecting data on it. 7 of the 12 teams had immediate fines of the week of or the week after the initial training.
Wow, that's great. And you also worked internationally, though. So you're training some people internationally. What can you tell us about that?
It's an amazing opportunity. We train in Austria, Germany, and Switzerland with multiple teams over there. I think we probably work with 50 or 60 teams there and about that many different breeds.
Now, is it because they're also advanced in that area? I mean, are they a country that's or countries that are sort of ahead in?
They really accept the trailing, or they call it man trailing over there. They accept that much more as a given activity over there. Where tracking seems to be a little bit more prevalent in the States. So even people that are novice that are just wanting to do this for fun as well, that's how they work. They do this scent collection, presenting the scent to the dog, working in heavily contaminated areas.
Wow, that's interesting. Let me ask you about some of the cases that you might have worked on, and over the years, maybe are there any in particular which stand out to you, which really make you go, "Wow, this was really worthwhile"?
We had a student go missing here at Florida State University back in 2019, I believe it was. I was getting ready to go overseas for a seminar, and we have done a lot of work with the Florida State University Police Department and their Emergency Management Homeland Security team. Well, the young man had been missing for 4 days. The sheriff's office here was doing due diligence trying to locate him, and they actually called us in on Friday morning and said, "Hey, we've got his car. Can you come out and give us a hand with this?" And we actually used drones with this. We'll talk a little bit about the drones. So we go, use the scent vacuum and go to his room. Luckily, there had been a list of individuals that had been in that room, and they had locked it down once they found out he was missing. So it was really a bonus for us to be able to look and see if any of these individuals had been to the search area, which they hadn't. We collected scent, went there. They put a bird up over, so a drone. So we had 3 drones up. One was watching the team. One was scanning the area for ahead of us in the direction we were traveling to make sure there was no areas for us. And they were mapping all of this the whole time. And then the third bird was they would rotate the birds in and out, the drones in and out because of the flight time issue.
Right.
And about, I think it was 2.5 hours, I actually saw the top of the young man's head as he was walking through the woods.
Really?
So it was a really wonderful find for us. It was an FSU student. We had FSU PD with us. The students that are working for me were from FSU, and they'd actually helped us develop the scent vacuum. Some of the engineers, they were actually in engineering school. So it was a big win for Florida State University that day.
No, that's great. That's a great story. Great story. And have you continued to look at the drones and incorporate them somehow?
We have. We started, I think, in 2016. I was actually in the program, the Emergency Management Homeland Security program here in Florida State. And we started talking with the instructors, Professor David Merrick, about utilizing these 2 pieces together. And what we find is, from an operational standpoint, if you're in a incident command center, you can see real time what teams are going on, what's happening there. So if your dog's trailing to a certain area, you can move resources to that area. Plus you're mapping and you're taking photos that could be extremely invaluable at the end. If it ended up being a criminal case or something happened to the canine team and you had to start a search. So there's just multiple uses for the imagery and the mapping component related to the drone utilization.
Interesting. I'm not sure what kind of drone you were using, but is there a certain height you fly to try? I mean, are you just trying to go really, really high and maximize your area, or do you want to get in close enough that you can still see details?
It depends on the case. We worked another case together here locally where it was a cold case and the young man had been missing for several years. So the mapping and the grid part was much more effective for us there. And then they actually located areas of interest for us to take in. We were using some cadaver dogs as well at that time to search those areas. It depends on the case. A lot of times, what we're utilizing it for is officer safety as well, and the canine team safety, because they're above us. They can see what's going on, especially if in an apprehension kind of situation. They can check corners. Um, in the case of the FSU student, we were pretty far out in the woods, and being able to get to him, we were having some trouble getting GPS coordinates. So the drone guys radioed, the drone operators radioed and said, "Hey, can you see the drone?" And the response team that would bring the ambulance in said, "Sure, drive to the drone."
Mm-hmm.
So it made the response much quicker at that point for them. So there's multiple uses for this.
Are there other, I was just thinking about the dogs. I mean, you train them for a very sort of specific task to, identify a specific scent and look for that scent. But are there other uses for the dog? Like, can you apply them in different ways? Like I know that a few weeks ago I had, her name's Dr. Sherry Forbes, who deals with cadaver dogs. And like, are they, I mean, one, I guess, is just looking for decomposing bodies or whatever, or flesh or something like that. So really not an identification, but I'm just wondering if your dogs had a scent similar to that they would, I mean, is it too specific for them?
What we tend to do is our dogs are what they refer to as single purpose. So trailing is all we want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
They will find pieces of evidence because of human odor being on the trail, and collecting evidence along that trail from other, video cameras, eyewitnesses. A lot of information and evidence can be obtained through a successful trail. But with the amount of training it takes to do this and the amount of time most people have to train, we kind of like the single purpose approach to this. You're much better if you can find this one niche and work on it and get it really well. Because it's a very difficult process. Trailing, there's so many environmental issues, there's so many challenges for you when you're out there, that putting as much time and effort into that one specific activity is extremely important.
Yeah. Have you ever had a situation where you're finding a person's stuff, you know what I mean? Like along the way where yeah. Can you tell me about that?
We actually worked a case here locally. It ended up being a murder case, and they took us to the crime scene, and they had multiple odors there that had been pre-collected for us. And I think I took the first odor, and the dog gave me a negative, didn't trail. Come to find out later on, it was a negative pad. And then we grabbed another pre-collected odor, and the dog trailed through an urban area, 6 lanes of traffic. I think it was 1.5 miles, 2 miles to a dumpster, and just was really showing a lot of interest around the dumpster there. And we actually found the suspect's knife underneath the dumpster.
Really?
And that was done 4 days after the suspect had been placed into custody. And that was double blind to us. We had no information on where that gentleman had been.
Wow, that's pretty cool. In terms of things that give the dogs problems. So, I mean, one thing you like right up front, you need a crisp, a good sample of scent or something that's, it hasn't been contaminated or whatever. And with that, that's pretty good. But are there other things that cause problems for the dogs? I mean, in the movies and stuff, you always see the guy running through the water, right? Because if he runs through the water, the dogs are done. So
that's actually why that is not actually true.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
The dogs the water, the moisture, it really assists them in their activity. There's following that trail. We actually had a dog that we trained, and he's in Jefferson, Missouri. His name's Zeus, and had only been in Jefferson probably, I guess, a month when the handler called me and said, "I'm going to look for a missing man who's been missing for 2 days. He has been diagnosed with dementia. We've had a lot of flooding here, a lot of rain." I said, "Good luck." Had a scent kit, started the trail, and he called me back 20 minutes later and said, "We found him." And I said, "I'm sorry." He said, "He's alive." The gentleman had been swept away and was underneath an overpass, kind of wedged in. So dog trailed right, I think it was about half a mile to 3/4 mile to locate that gentleman.
Right to him. Wow, that's pretty amazing. Do you find that the dogs tend to Like, is it sort of scattered the way that the method in which they use, or I mean, they go here, they go there, and then it's like, oh, they got it, and then you find it's like a direct beeline for the people, or is it kind of they got to figure it out first?
We call it the dance. So that's the way it looks. It looks like I tell handlers, if it feels fluid and you're moving in a direction, then you're probably doing it right. So you tend to see that. They'll get to places where there's, intersections with cars and all that, and you'll see them have to work out of that area before they find the exit to follow the individual. So it really is. It becomes a dance. And most of us that do this work are kind of type A, and we're not very patient. So that's where we tend to make our most mistakes, is when the dog is casting in these odor pools and trying to find that exit from that area.
Have you found that there's been a greater acceptance nowadays? Is the use of canines and dogs, like, is that growing? Is it something that is, I mean, is the future big for you guys, or?
I think so. Even with the cadaver work, they've tried to find devices that would do better than the dog's nose, and to my knowledge, there hasn't been anything found at this point in time that's better than that dog's nose.
Mm-hmm.
Bloodhounds are especially gifted at the trailing. They've been bred to do it for centuries. They're really good at it. Their olfactory senses are just amazing. And there's still things that happen with these dogs, and somebody will say, "How did that happen?" And you're like, I can't take credit for anything. That's just the dog's ability on that.
And do you get them bred somewhere, or do you have a special breeder you go to, or?
We do. We have a breeder that we found, a much more athletic looking bloodhound. People tend to see the really large bloodhounds with the wrinkles. Our dogs don't have quite as many of those wrinkles, and they're a lot smaller. 70, 80 pounds for the males, 60, 70 pounds for the females.
Wow. Okay. And in terms of cost, what would it take, if I say, hey, Paul, I got a dog, and I got a hound, and I want to get him trained up or something like that. What is the cost of doing that?
Well, it depends on where the dog is and the age of the dog. And for us to train that dog, it's usually about $1,000 a week, depending on what all you're going to do with that dog.
Mm-hmm.
We just trained a dog here that was about 10 months old. It took us about a month to really get him up and running. Of course, we're continuing that training after the dog gets back. That's one of the components that we do as a company, is once the dog gets back to their operational site, we do follow up. We're talking with that handler, and I provide consulting for a year. So if they get on the case, I actually had a call yesterday. A young man was looking for a suicidal female, and I pulled the area up on my laptop and was talking with him about all the things that were going on there. So they ended up finding the lady a little bit later in the afternoon. So we provide that support, and then debrief. We want to know what happened, what are some good things, what are some things that we can work on, because we want to continuously improve this process.
Oh, okay, nice. One of the things I remember at the conference when we first met was you were showing a lot of different tests that you guys were running. Like you were, putting the dogs through different types of, tests here and tests there and that sort of thing. So I imagine by now, you probably have a lot of data that you've accumulated. Are you looking to, I was trying to do some research, a little bit of research on this, and it's not like there's a mountain of papers out there or research. So are you looking to do anything like that in the future, or publish some things?
We are. We've been collecting data from our handlers all over the U.S. for a couple of years now, and we've actually ramped it up a little bit more. We've got one data set, and we're trying to dig in and get more data. My wife's an expert at that, so she's always talking about cleaning the data to make sure we're getting exactly what we want. Sometimes it's difficult because there's finite amount of time, and these officers are on the ground working cases, and some of the information they can't give us because of working cases. But so we're moving forward. I think we have 175 data points right now on actual cases that's been worked. So that's really, really important to us, as well as some initiatives we have here in Florida, bringing the lost home. We work with about 12 different agencies, and we're getting a lot of feedback back and forth. So we're looking at the missing persons response as well as the criminal investigative and response as well with these canine resources.
I see. And in your, is there anything you can say about kind of like the success rate of the dogs, like overall?
The information has been provided to us. Confirmed trails, we're in the mid 90 percentiles. So, and there's been some research that's done some testing with that, and that we're falling in line with some of the research out there that says dogs that are specifically trained to this, that have a certification and training regimen that goes along with it, you're going to see them in the mid 90 percentile in success rate on confirmed trails.
Well, that's huge. I mean, I would have been happy if it was like 75 or something like that, because, you know, when it's a missing person case, you want to throw whatever you have, right? So anything that's in your favor is great. But if it's over 80% or 85%, damn, that's pretty impressive.
We had a couple of cases here in Florida in the last few weeks. This handler had never had a find yet. We trained with him in January, I believe it is. They have our scent kit program. He gets a call out and responds. The grandfather was an autistic child. The grandfather had the scent kit and met them at the front door. He presented the scent to the dog. Under 5 minutes, they had located the young man.
Yeah, interesting. We talked about drones as a form of technology that's aiding. Are there any other types of technologies that you're using with the dogs, or things maybe in the future that you think are going to be incorporated with your line of work? Yeah.
We're working on enhancing what we already have now. I think we're actually being able to retool some of the dogs that are traditionally have been tracking dogs. So we've added that component to a couple agencies that made their patrol dogs scent discriminate, so that they were able to work in heavily contaminated areas, in areas where, you know, these dogs are apprehension dogs. So you don't want to get an inadvertent bite on someone that. Mm-hmm. So we've had some success with retooling these teams. I actually got a call yesterday. One of the dogs had 2 successful finds using these methods, patrol dogs. We've actually I think it's been 2 or 3 months ago, we had a patrol dog that we helped retool and had a missing child, suicidal child, 12-year-old. The trail was 12 hours old and heavily contaminated. And that patrol team were able to find that young lady alive.
Interesting. I see. Interesting.
So
no, sorry. I was just going to ask. So it just popped into my mind though. What about like when you're doing a trail, or when you're moving, you're going over long distances? Do you record that? Like, is there a camera and GPS or stuff like that on the dog, or on the handler?
Well, the handler or the backup usually wears it. Most of the law enforcement officers are carrying body cams now, so they're recording it. That if we have a drone over us, they're recording everything we do.
That's true.
We're having some discussion on developing some systems where that capability will be enhanced, because there's times when they lose contact with the team because of GPS technology and going into some areas where we tend to lose. So we're wanting to be able to enhance that capability a little bit as well, so that if I'm working the incident command, I've got an eye on my team the whole time they're out there.
So how many people you have on your team?
1, 2. We got about 5 right now but we're in a college town. You work for the university there, so mm-hmm. We have all these new bright minds that are hungry for doing this kind of work. So I've had probably 20 students come through this program, helping from everything from development of the kits to actually, I had a student with me on the deployment from that missing FSU student that actually worked the dog part of the time while I was out there. So
yeah, nice, very nice. And so what's next for you guys? I mean, what's sort of on the horizon? What's the next big thing, or what areas are you focusing in?
We're still focusing on missing individuals, Alzheimer's, dementia, children on the spectrum. I mean, it's not a day that you pick up a newspaper or you look online that there's not someone missing. So getting these resources available to as many people as possible is what our goal for our company is. We're having a lot of success with using this process. And it's just, I mean, if you take one piece of it out, it's not as successful. Mm-hmm. So you're mitigating the risks through developing a program that has pre-collected scent available for these teams, training for these teams, follow-up, debriefing, and continuing to look at improving the process and getting some research out there. There's not a ton of information about missing persons out there as well. So we know in that data set, there's going to be things that we find that's going to help us get better at this.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you mentioned about, having resources and access to resources. What happens if there's an agency? I mean, is it easy to get a trailing dog? I mean, is it easy to find, like, in your area? I mean, I guess if you're in a big city or something, maybe it's different than if you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. I don't know.
We're working on developing a list of those resources across the U.S. Still in building that, but we actually deploy ourselves. I've actually flown all the way to Utah with a team to do a search. Been all over the Southeast. Mm-hmm. Actually done a few searches in the Midwest as well.
No, is that the farthest you've gone?
I think almost made it to Canada. We were in the UP doing some work.
Yeah. Now, do you have dogs in Canada too?
We do not, but we have a really unique opportunity. We're working with Jessica Tumale. She is a Paralympic from Canada. She's actually a silver medalist, I think, and she's preparing to go to Tokyo. But she reached out to me several months back and said, "Hey, I really want to learn how to do this, but I want to be upfront with you." She said, "I'm completely blind." So it kind of took me back for just a second. And then she started talking about what she did with her dogs that provided, her ability to move around in her community safely. And I said, at the end of the conversation, you're going to be the best handler we've ever trained because there's so many things that you're already doing that's going to make you good at this. So we're working with her right now to put we got a dog for her. We're working with her to develop our training, and we're learning a ton from her because we only use certain parts of our capabilities to work with our dogs. Mm-hmm. And she's opening up a whole new method for working dogs. She could tell us things from the way her dog's breathing, things that the dog's doing that's going to make us better as a company and in training handlers. And we're just really excited about her and the things that she's doing. She's a super young lady. It
makes a lot of sense. It just makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It does. It just kind of took me back when she called me and she said she'd been turned down by a lot of folks. And I'm like, wow, this could be a little bit challenging. And then she started talking about what she did day in and day out with her dogs and the things she done with training them. I'm like, wow, I'm going to learn a lot from you. So
that's awesome. Well, I'll tell you what, Paul, that's pretty good. I think that's a great story and a great way to kind of end the conversation. I want to say thanks so much for being here. Like I said, I think you're doing great work. I love the sort of the passion and the way you're kind of innovating this thing and incorporating stuff. So, I want to wish you and your team all the very best of luck. And I want to keep up. I mean, it was a few years ago and we kind of keep watching you every now and then. So yeah, at some point in the future, let's catch up again. And I want to hear some more.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Cheers. Here, I'll just hang back when I let you go here and I'll come back and chat with you. All right, folks. Well, that's a super interesting conversation. I thought that was really cool. Some really interesting things there for sure. That does it for this episode. And next week we may be skipping. I don't know for sure just yet, but we're going to try and reschedule one of the speakers. But if not, we'll definitely be back the week after next. So thanks for watching Forensics Talks, and we shall see you soon. Bye-bye.